This is Theresa May's first opportunity to speak directly to all the other EU leaders in the room, to speak, as it were, over the heads of the European Commission, to try and speak to them leader to leader. And she's going to adapt her arguments to make the best of that. One of the things she wants to say is this is a dangerous world. You're a national leader, so am I. We should hug each other close, stay as close as we possibly can, where we can. The other argument I suspect she's going to make, because she's been making it in other media outlets recently, not least in the German press, is how would you, as a leader of a country, like it if your jurisdiction was split in two in some way through a change to the customs union? And she's there talking, of course, about the backstop on Northern Ireland. And she's going to try and appeal to them as countries, some of them have their own nationalist, separatist issues. Would you really like this happening on your doorstep? Do you want this can of worms opened? I don't think she'll put it in explicit language like that, but it's quite clear from the arguments she's made before. She will be putting those arguments in the room. There has been some mood music before this summit that would suggest the two sides were getting closer. That has been the narrative coming out of bits of Whitehall. But the European Commission President, one of the people she's trying to speak over in the room tonight, arrived and said that he thought the two sides were still far away. Maybe they're getting closer and still far away, but there really isn't much time left. Maybe the healing powers of a cultural capital can do what other gatherings have not. Theresa May has told aides she believes the meeting in Salzburg is critical. A moment when she wants the EU leaders to do what she's already done and soften their negotiating lines.
I believe this is the right proposal because it maintains frictionless trade. It's the only credible and negotiable plan on the table that delivers no hard border in Northern Ireland and also delivers on the vote of the British people. And if we're going to achieve a successful conclusion, then just as the UK has evolved its position, the EU will need to evolve its position too.
Both sides have been growing fearful of no deal and the dangers of adding to instability in dangerous times.
In Austria, we would feel the consequences of an unruly exit. It will have consequences on our economy, but also on jobs in Austria.
All afternoon at Salzburg airport, private jets spewed out leaders. But has anything really changed in these talks? Could anything change here? As a curtain raiser to this summit, Michel Barnier, the chief EU negotiator, has talked about using technology to minimise the impact of checks on goods as they flow into the area governed by the EU's rules after Brexit. That's exactly what the British government has been asking for, but the British government was talking about minimising impact on the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Michel Barnier is still talking about Northern Ireland staying under single market and customs union rules. He's talking about checks as goods go across the Irish Sea from Britain.
Well, I welcome the fact that Michel Barnier is recognising the need to find a new solution because the original proposal put forward by the European Commission was unacceptable to us. But what we cannot accept is seeing Northern Ireland carved away from the United Kingdom customs territory.
The other massive outstanding business is, of course, the future relationship post-Brexit. The EU27 still believe Theresa May's plans amount to some kind of smash and grab raid on the EU rules she wants to stick close to, discarding others that she doesn't. What's changed in the run-up to this summit is that on the declaration on the future relationship, in the officials' jargon, they're talking about, instead of going low, nailing down all the details, going high, which means keeping the thing pretty woolly, saving the real negotiations for another day. Around Theresa May, some people worry that could agitate already mutinous forces on her own backbenches.
The Irish question, or the framework for economic cooperation, the UK's proposals will need to be reworked and further negotiated. Today there's perhaps more hope, but there is surely less and less time.
But the European Council leader also said he acknowledged that the UK position had undergone a positive evolution. That's a key buzzword. At an earlier summit, the EU said if the UK position evolves, the EU one could too. A timetable is taking shape here. The leaders are expected to agree a mid-November summit at which the deal, in theory, will be wrapped up. But the distances between the two sides remain great, and not everyone wants a broad brush agreement to paper over the cracks.
Well, with me, the leading Eurosceptic Conservative MP John Redwood and the Labour MP Wes Streeting, who supports the People's Vote campaign for a second referendum on whether to leave the EU. John Redwood, the Treasury Minister Mel Stride says that if you chuck Chequers, you'll either halt Brexit or usher in a second referendum.
I don't agree with either of those outcomes. We want either a good deal for our future relationship, or we want to leave and have all the freedoms and get our money back immediately and spend that to provide a big boost to the economy. And it's very difficult to see that a deal will be better. Well, we've offered all sorts of compromises, and the EU is not interested. And we did warn we warned the Prime Minister that we didn't think the Chequers deal would recommend itself to the European Union, let alone to us, and sure enough, it hasn't.
Name one compromise that you as a Brexiteer have offered.
Well, we were prepared to look at a deal which kept us in the EU for a bit longer and all that kind of thing. But having looked at it, I can't see any attraction to it at all. I think it is much better that we have a clean exit, end all the uncertainty. I don't want another 21 months of uncertainty for business where all these arguments go on, and there's still no proper deal. And we certainly shouldn't pay them $39 billion for nothing, which is what we would be doing if there is no firm conclusion on the future partnership.
OK, so no second referendum?
No, of course not. No.
Right. Wes Streeting, is there any kind of Brexit that you would go for?
Well, I argued right from the outset that we should accept the result of the referendum and pursue a course of action that protected people's jobs and livelihoods, our strong security cooperation with the European Union and other areas where there's clear common good and common interest.
So actually a watered-down Brexit would suit you just fine?
My fear is looking at the outline of the Chequers deal. I mean, we're in this position where I don't believe it commands a majority of the House of Commons. John Redwood and I will both vote against the Chequers deal for very different reasons. And I think, whether people voted leave or remain, they see a Brexit negotiation process going very badly, and a Brexit that will ultimately look very little like the Brexit that people voted for. And for two reasons, I'm advocating a people's vote on the final deal. There's a principled reason, which is if Brexit looks substantially different, people should get the say on the final deal. There's also a pragmatic reason, which is I don't see at the moment how the Prime Minister will be able to break a parliamentary deadlock on this issue, and ultimately she might have to turn to a second vote.
But there is a parliamentary deadlock. Parliament, in its wisdom, has approved both the EU Withdrawal Notification Act, which sent the letter which does all that we need to do in international law to leave the EU on the 29th of March next year, and it approved by a smaller majority the EU Withdrawal Act, which does everything we need to do in UK law. So Parliament has rightly expressed the view of the British people in the referendum that we are leaving on the 29th of March next year.
But there's no parliamentary agreement.
And that is exactly what we will do.
But there's no parliamentary agreement for any deal that is currently on the...
So we just
or
leave.
No deal. There's no agreement for that either.
Parliament has said we are leaving on the 29th of March, and I do not believe Parliament will then repeal all that and say to the British people, you were wrong and we don't agree with you anymore. Why did Parliament vote that through? Because a lot of people disagree with me in Parliament. They don't have my enthusiasm for how much better off we're going to be out of the EU. They did it, and the Labour Party voted for the Notification Act because they knew that was the will of the British people, and they were right to do so.
This is about the will of the British people.
Well, I mean, there is absolutely no way, though, that a majority of MPs are going to allow the UK to tumble off a cliff at the end of March. The consequences of leaving the European Union with no deal would be catastrophic, John, in terms of people's jobs, livelihoods, the Irish border question.
But you said all this about voting no, and you were wrong. You said we're going to have 800,000 job losses in the first winter after the vote, and the number of jobs went up. You can't keep on fibbing like this.
No, come on, John. There are very practical issues. You haven't been able to address people's concerns about customs arrangements. It's not clear where you stand on security cooperation with the European Union. And the Irish border question is a very live issue. John Major and Tony Blair both warned about the Irish border issue, and it's an absolute disaster.
On that point, you've had decades to come up with your proposals for what Britain would look like. Well, you didn't.
It's all over my website over the last 3 years.
You decided not to publish it.
And after, no, I published.
OK, you personally, but we're
plans.
talking about the joint manifesto, not the John Redwood manifesto.
Well, I think you'll find that my colleagues in the ERG have published a lot as well. Ian Duncan-Smith has published a very good thing on borders and migration.
Was pulled. You couldn't come to an agreement.
It is a perfectly clear position, and part of it was published recently about the Northern Ireland border. Watch this space, more will be released. But the position is very clear anyway. It is that leaving without the current withdrawal agreement is much better for Britain because we keep the money and we don't have another 21 months of having to accept all the rules.
The Brexit Secretary says that it's weakening Theresa May's negotiating hand to have the second referendum in the offing.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think at this stage in the process, with the total lack of clarity about where we're going to land on Brexit, I think it's the responsible thing to do now to plan to give people a say on the final deal. I think it's democratic. I think it's pragmatic. And I also think it is very telling. You know, if it was as simple as people suggested, leaving the European Union, then why did Boris Johnson and David Davis fail to make that case around the table at Chequers? The parents of Brexit have abandoned the whole process during childbirth. It's absolutely outrageous, really, that Boris Johnson and David Davis have gotten away with it.
Well, they had an obvious disagreement with the Prime Minister because they think her civil service advisors are quite wrong to try and recreate great chunks of the European Union we voted to leave, when both campaigns agreed that we were leaving the customs union and single market, and were also pointing out, as is proving to be true, that it wasn't negotiable with the EU anyway. So we're just wasting time dealing with the Chequers proposal, which is dead.
Well, you're both against the Chequers proposal. One of you is making a horrible mistake. Which one is it?
Well, we're both speaking for our views. Wes wants to stay in the European Union and doesn't accept the verdict of the referendum. I've always thought we'd be better off out, and I love the verdict of the referendum. That's the difference.
I mean, I did accept the result of the referendum. That's why I voted to
you
trigger
want
Article
to do it
50
all
to
over
authorise the process. I just think it's been such a disaster, and I'm not prepared to put people's jobs and livelihoods, our national security and our future place in the world at risk.
No, nor am
on
I,
a
and
basis
that's
of
why
a whole
I'm voting for
prospectus that
Brexit
was
and
promised
seeing it
and
through.
cannot be delivered. What was promised, that whole prospectus, like the entire base of the Leave campaign, that we'd be able to take back control of our money, our laws and our borders and have economic success.
And that's what we must do by leaving on the 29th of March.
Then where's the plan? Where's, you know, Boris Johnson managed to write 2 articles, one leave, one remain, but he's managed to write a resignation letter, but he's not managed to come up with a manifesto.
It's a great plan. I set out a
for
budget on how we spend all the money. Why doesn't your party want to spend the money at home instead of giving it to the EU? That's a big question.
I'm going to take back control of this debate. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much.